Hello, everyone.
Hello!
How are all of you in the internet lands?
I hope you all are doing well.
I know we already have some of our friends hanging out in the chat with us. Sin and Noel, Stuart. Nice to see
Good
you
to
all.
see you all.
We will
For any,
go
oh,
ahead.
I was to say, for those of you who might be worried, also welcome, David. We're going to not discuss The Mandalorian at all today. I'm not even tell you if I like it or not. There's two videos you can go and watch if you want to know my opinion on it. For those of you who are watching this at a later time, it just premiered in the US and a few other places today. We won't be talking about that. Yeah, Stuart, that's fine. I think we're just going to keep discussion to Rogue One and Rogue One specifically today,
Or
to
at
the
least
best
to
we
the
can.
films, anyway.
To the films, yeah, stuff that everyone has had plenty of time to enjoy. I know there's so much content coming out right now as we get closer to the Rise of Skywalker, but we'll try to keep it to at least anything that's been out for like 6 months or something.
Right.
I think is pretty fair.
And we'll have plenty of other times to talk about The Mandalorian, and we'll have a specific Resistance Reborn stream once we finish reading it. So,
Yeah, we
yeah.
haven't finished it
Yeah,
ourselves,
so
so.
don't spoil it for our account either, because I want to know what happens. Um, But yeah, so Rogue One.
Oh,
It's next in our line. So if you're just tuning in, this is the first one of these you've been to. We're doing. I should have gotten all my Rogue One pops. I didn't. Now I feel bad. Um, have some subtle background changes here. But we are watching through every Star Wars film more or less once a week. We're a little bit off our schedule this week because last week was a crazy week, and we're doubling up this
Mhm.
week. But we're watching through in chronological order on our journey to the Rise of Skywalker, and
Yep.
we have Rogue One this week. Um, so as we promised, we'll have an in-depth discussion of all the reasons that Grand Admiral Tarkin is a better character than director Orson Krennic.
You
But we'll,
mean you mean Grand Moff Tarkin?
yeah, I did say Grand Admiral, didn't I? I just give him all the titles. He's that awesome. Um,
It's because the cap is actually attached to my head, Stuart.
yeah,
It's a little known fact. It doesn't come off. I'm like a Mandalorian.
yep.
Yeah, that's the closest I'll come to saying anything. Sorry.
I'm just gonna take that and I'm gonna just use that. I'm not gonna set that as a sound on my phone. That's like my text tone now. Is you saying that you're like a Mandalorian because
I am like a
that
Mandalorian.
just warmed my heart. That's that's years of conversations now that I'm finding some solace in. at
Oh
at
man.
Karen Travis on Twitter. Um,
Anyway.
but so Rogue One. What was? Oh, maybe I'll start us off because like I remember when they first announced that we were going to get anthology films,
Mhm.
and we were told that Rogue One was kind of going to be a war film set in the Star Wars universe, and it was going to be in the original trilogy, even before we kind of knew that it was going to be about
Just fair.
the Death Star plans and that sort
Mhm.
of because that was a story that we had kind of numerous explanations for in Legends. Um,
Very quite a few.
and so like even like it wasn't like it was new like this is not an adaptation, but it's not a new type of story.
Right.
But I got excited one because I wanted more Star Wars. I always want more
Mhm.
Star Wars. I'm greedy for Star Wars. Um, but like I just really liked the idea. I've always as much as I love the Force and the Jedi and things like that, I like the idea that there are other people in the galaxy sometimes besides people with the last name of Skywalker, and this was going to be a
Mhm.
film where we got to see that. And like I just remember, like I cried seeing this in the film because in the theaters because I loved it so much. It was like, and again, just like with Solo last week, I think part of it is probably the nostalgia of it. It's set in the original trilogy, and it's
Mhm.
on Yavin, and like we get to see Bail Organa, and we get to see Mon Mothma, and like there's those connections that have those feelings for me. But I just loved it through and through, and it's still a film that
Yeah.
I really have an appreciation for. I like the ways, most of the ways at least, that it's different from the other films, that it does its own thing, but
Mhm.
still kind of fits into the overall arc of the films.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
I'm a big Rogue One fan. And I feel like most of Twitter is. And yeah, and Catalyst. It's hard for me to separate. David Fez talked about Catalyst in the chat. It's hard for me to separate
Mm-hmm.
Rogue One from Catalyst in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
because they're all kind of a piece together. And if you've never read Catalyst before, um, I highly recommend it. It will change the way you see Rogue One. Um,
It's so good.
but what were your kind of
My
initial thoughts about Rogue One?
my favorite thing they did with Rogue One was really the announcement video. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know how many people remember this, but they did an announcement video at whatever celebration, and all we knew is it was going to be a new kind of Star Wars movie. And it starts out with this wonderful shot of Yavin,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't necessarily know it's Yavin at the time, but it's this beautiful forest, and it's nothing from the film at all because it was just a proof of concept. And it tilts up, and you see a moon, and then you realize it's not the moon, it's the Death Star, and it was literally a visual pun of that's no moon, it's a space station.
Yeah.
And then it said Rogue One, and I loved it. It was so clever how they did that, even just in like that little 30-second thing. And I was excited. I think a lot of us wondered when we heard the title Rogue One if it was going to be connected to Rogue Squadron. Technically, the movie is not, though. I believe they've now made it where Rogue Squadron in canon is named after Rogue One, but you get that from the Star Wars comics, and
Right.
it's not said in the film. Um, so I know a couple people who are kind of thinking it was going to be more of that kind of movie specifically, but I really liked the idea of the Death Star plans. I like the idea. I think for the people who don't like Rogue one of their biggest complaints is they don't like the exhaust hole, exhaust port thing being an inside job. I love
Yeah.
that. It's one
I
of
do.
my favorite parts of the movie. To take this thing that wasn't really a plot hole, I think, the idea that the Empire wouldn't care about one small thing makes sense. But to take something like that everybody had just kind of made fun of for like 35 years, um, and then to make it an inside job super conspiracy thing, and then have the super conspiracy be true. I don't know. I like the whole concept of where it came from.
I do too, and I think that they did a really nice job of it. And again, it's difficult for me. I watched the film again this morning on Disney Plus because now that's a thing I can do whenever I want to. Um, but it's hard for me to separate the film from Catalyst, like I said. But it's such a beautiful story when you get the full picture of who the Ursos were, and like the
Mm-hmm.
interactions of Jalen, or Galen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking
Caleb.
college football quarterbacks of Galen and Jen and Lyra and Krennic,
Mm-hmm.
and you get to see the relationships between these people, and you realize that it's like there was a joke for decades that the Death Star was an inside job, but to see
Yeah.
that it's more than just a throwaway reference, that it was a person who was driven by science that got convicted about what his
Mm-hmm.
science was being used for. Like, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's an interesting story in and of itself, but in the Star Wars universe, a universe where like morality is built into the fabric of the universe itself, in a way,
Mm-hmm.
to see that story driven by a person's moral conviction. I
Yeah.
think it's a beautiful story, and to get that in contrast even with, like, and we'll talk about this too, but like with Saw Gerrera's morality and how it's different, and I think that you get these different glimpses of people trying to do the right thing in Rogue
Mm-hmm.
One, and they don't all try to do the same right thing. But
Right.
but I think that's one of the things I like so much about this film is that it's still driven by this central, fight against ultimate evil and the ability to destroy planets.
Yeah.
But but people approach it from different things, and I think I like that aspect of it as well.
I recently, so like weeks ago, I watched this movie, and then I have recorded an episode of my kind of now half abandoned Redemption in Star Wars series. And I've had it recorded, I just haven't edited it after like several weeks, and I'm really hoping talking about the film will motivate me to finally do that. But I looked at the film in the context of characters seeking redemption,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's easy to talk about this movie and talk about it in terms of hope. Hope is said probably more often than any other word in the movie.
Yeah.
It's a very obvious theme, but I think that it's not just hope of good people to overcome bad things. I think there's a lot of very conflicted characters. You have Galen, who, as you said, was doing some really questionable science and didn't realize it for a long time. You have Cassian, who is this guy who the mission has become more important than the mission statement, if that makes sense.
Yep.
I mean, when we meet him, he's murdering his contact in the alleyway to protect the mission, even though that's, he should have, in theory, fought to save the guy.
Right.
So he has a story, but then Jen has, completely given up everything. David mentioned Rebel Rising, which is another great novel, and we see how much Jen wants to help in that book, and then she's reached a point where she doesn't care as much, or she claims she doesn't care. One of my all-time, like probably top 5 scenes in a Star Wars movie is the confrontation between Jin and Cassian after Galen dies, and Jin is certain that Cassian was going to kill him, and
Right.
she puts him on the spot, and she's like, "I know what you were doing," and he's like, "You know, we don't all have the luxury of getting to choose when and where we care about things."
Right.
Like there's so many good lines in that, and shit, like the way it ends where Jin's like, "You can't talk your way around this," and Cassian says, "I don't have to," and he walks away. It is just, that scene is fire to me, and I love it because they're both right and they're both wrong.
Yep.
But that's kind of a long-winded way of saying what I find interesting is, you have K2SO is a former Imperial droid who's becoming a Rebellion droid. Bodhi is a former Imperial pilot who's becoming a good guy. Baze is a Guardian of the Will who lost his way and finds his way back. Literally every good guy character in the movie, except for Chirrut, is on a journey to redeem themselves, but not in a "I'm Darth Vader and I took over half the galaxy" sort of way, but in just a literal everyday I failed as a person and I have to redeem myself
Right.
kind of a thing. And I really like that.
Well, and I like too that they're all right and they're all wrong, but they disagree with one another too.
Yeah.
Like even when you look at well, like I think about like Bail Organa and Mon Mothma on the council too. Like they're not wrong for wanting consensus among people before they lash out against the Empire because
Mhm.
the rebellion is still such a fragile thing. But Jen is also not wrong, obviously, in saying no. We have to take this thing out now, and this is the one shot we have.
Right.
So
Yep.
like everyone is right, and everyone except for Chirrut, I think has something wrong about them as well. And I
Mhm.
think it's interesting in that they all get to pursue that redemption, or that they all
Yeah.
get to get some type of validation of who they are, either that they're proven right or they rediscover themselves, or they learn something new and change their mind. Like
Mhm.
I don't know, I really love like I saw somebody say something earlier that there's not a lot of character development, and that's the thing I hear a lot of people say about Rogue One, and it doesn't really have the space for a ton of character development for as many characters as it has. But
Mhm.
I think there's more to it than people give it credit for sometimes, and I think all of these characters, with few exceptions, have arcs
Mhm.
where they get to at least find some type of validation for who they are, or some type
Mhm.
of like response to the things they want and the hope that they have or the hope that they don't
Mhm.
have, in a way that feels worthy of a payoff. And again, it's not that way for every character, for me at
Mhm.
least, but it's that way enough that I really, I mean, this film just resonates with me so much. Um,
Mhm. Well, and I think one of the most tragic things about the movie, is that Galen ultimately is this big hero and no one will ever know it. I mean,
yeah,
like, yeah, he is largely responsible for the Death Star being feasible. And you can make an argument if you've read Catalyst that he should have seen it sooner, but he did know what was going on.
Yeah.
And I like his realization that they didn't really need him to finish the Death Star. Welcome, Nolan. I like that we find out that he, he really just went back because if he was involved, then he could control it, uh, and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, he does create the fault in the Death Star. At the end of the day, he does create the opportunity for the rebellion to get their victory, but no one will ever know. Um, and that's kind of sad, and it's not entirely unlike Vader when he gets redeemed, that people won't know that he became Anakin again, and we see some of that in Bloodline. But like Jyn gets to know. Jyn gets to know how her father really felt about her, and maybe that's the most important part. But if she had lived, she would have spent the rest of her life hearing Galen Erso spoken, um, with disdain.
Right.
He never would have really gotten credit for it.
Yeah. I mean, but I think to that point too. Like, I think it's such a beautiful father-daughter story, at least in the first act of the film, where you get, um, you get these moments with from the prologue scenes, whatever you want to call them, where you get to see, Jen and her parents, or you get to see Jen and Saw, and then you get moments with Jen and Galen and Jen and Saw, and I think there's I think that connection feels natural enough that you kind of understand the emotions that she's feeling in there anyway,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think it just packs such a powerful punch for me. Um, when I think about because it's I mean, if we want to get real about it for a minute, maybe this is too much, but I feel like it's a big deal in the life of every person when you realize your parents aren't perfect,
Mm-hmm.
and to have to, to know that your father is participating in genocide, that's the level of
Right.
not perfect that your father is,
Right.
and feel that redemption that your father gets, even though the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
galaxy doesn't know, that and that he did it because of you, and
Mm-hmm.
he named it after you,
Yeah.
that's the whole idea there. I think it's just such a I don't know, it just it really gets me when I think that, um, but
Yeah. And for Jen to grow up the way she did, because I mean, she's obviously old enough to remember her parents, and old enough to know like you go and hide in the bunker. Um, but she isn't necessarily old enough to know too much.
right,
And then for that much time to pass, memory has a funny way of changing things.
yeah,
Um, and to grow up a certain way and see things and perceive things a certain way over time, you could start to remember things differently, and then to question how well you even knew your father. I think the part that gets me is when she's at the rebel base and they're asking, when was the last time you had any contact with your father? And she says, I like to think he's dead. It's easier that way.
yeah,
And the fact that she's just like preemptively gone through mourning him rather than wonder where he is and what he's up to,
right,
not just from the perspective of is he okay, but like why does she never say, or why does she never see him again? You know what I mean?
yeah. I mean, and I think largely he's done the same thing. I think he's trying to atone for her, for what he's done on her behalf, not knowing if he will ever see her again, and
Mm-hmm.
he's trying to, this is his way of making his peace with it too, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
different type of thing, a different type of peace that they're making with it, because I mean he doesn't know if she's alive either, and so he's trying to do this in honor of her not knowing whether or not she's alive either, and I think that's an interesting dynamic there, and it's tragic. This film is a tragedy in a lot of ways. It's a tragic film that is
Yep.
about hope, and I think that's one of
Yeah.
the reasons I like it too. Is it's such a contradiction that it's undeniably a tragedy, but it is also
Yep.
undeniably about hope, and that
Yep.
it does both of those things at once. I think
Mm-hmm.
is something that kind of takes it to another level,
Yeah.
than just just an action movie set in the Star Wars universe.
Well, and I think there's something deeper to that too, because it's easy to have hope when it's the end of the Phantom Menace and you've just had a big parade and everybody's having a party and you have like the static 1990s electricity ball and
Yeah.
you're holding it over your head. Like, it's easy to have hope then, but you can have hope then and have no idea that you're standing next to the Sith Lord. You know what
Right.
I mean? Welcome, Poe. And it's one thing to have it then, but it's to pull from Last Jedi. Faith is like the sun. If you only believe it when you can see it, you'll never make it through the night.
Yeah.
Rogue One is the night, and A New Hope is the day. And I think that's when you can really give your message of hope, is to see it in the face of such overwhelming odds. Every time I watch Rogue One, I'm fascinated by the final act of that film and how all the pieces go, because the Rogue One crew goes, and then because they go and attack, the rest of the rebellion goes and attacks.
Right.
But because the rest of the rebellion goes and attacks, the shield closes. So then the Rogue One crew can't get out. But the Rogue One crew created the distraction that was going to bring in the Imperials. So if the Rebel fleet hadn't have come, they wouldn't have been able to stand up against the Star Destroyer and Darth Vader. But then they have to close the gate, and then Vader's there, and it just becomes this whole weird sequence of events where they're simultaneously making everything worse. But it's
Right.
the only way to get out of it, and it's just this constant wave of change of circumstances that I find fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, and that, to quote MLK, the arc of the universe bends towards justice. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think you get that here too, and I think that in and of itself is such a hopeful message, that despite the fact that Cassian was a separatist, despite the fact that Jen checked out for decades, despite the fact that Saw is a terrorist, despite the fact that Bodhi was an Imperial, like, despite all of these things, like, the Force tends towards balance. Like, the Force tends towards the light, and I think that's such a hopeful message, and I think I don't know, I really love that the takeaway from this film is that even though you're making it worse by trying to make it better, like, the good still wins out in the end, and I think that's a message that not a lot of films are brave enough to give us anymore. It used to be so saccharine that every film had a happy ending, and I feel like for so long we've gotten so jaded, and our art is reflective of that. And I like that Rogue One, which people say is the darkest of all the Star Wars films, ends with a resounding moment of hope.
I agree, completely agree. I like too looking at it. I mean, part of it is probably just my own personal preferences, but two different parallels that involve Krennic. I like the kind of almost Frankenstein monster-esque thing between him and Galen,
Right.
where they're both creators of the Death Star.
Right.
But Galen is the Dr. Frankenstein that can find a way to poison his own monster. And he dies in service to seeing the monster die, where it is so poetic that Krennic is killed by the Death Star.
Right.
And probably in no small part, I feel like Tarkin would have fired on Scarif anyway, but he probably wasn't sad that Krennic was there.
Right.
Probably he's probably not sending down a rescue crew to look for him first. But I think it's very apt that he's killed that way. But then if you look at the other parallel between Krennic and Tarkin, they definitely have a rivalry between the two of them. And Krennic is shot by the Death Star, but then Tarkin dies on the Death Star because he won't leave it.
Right.
Which is, of course, not in Rogue One. That's in A New Hope. But I think there is something else to it there, is that there's this sense of justice, there's this sense of balance. And if you're going to tie yourself to the Death Star in such a way, I mean, even if you want to look at Vader and Palpatine, Vader, I mean, yeah, he didn't stop the construction of the Death Star, but he was the one who was like, don't be too proud of this technological terror you constructed. Like, he still believed that the Force was more important than the Death Star.
Right.
and escaped. But he escaped the first Death Star's destruction, and yes, his body, even though he died on the Death Star, like he was redeemed, and Luke took his body away. Versus Palpatine, who I
In
I
as much as
mean,
we know so far.
in as much as we know so far, died on the Death Star probably. Or at the very least, he lost his power for the time being on the Death Star. That's fair to say.
Yeah.
So I feel like the Death Star kind of becomes this kind of, I don't know, fate magnet. I'm not smart enough to know like what a real term for it is, but it's like if you tie yourself to it, it kind of drags you with it.
Yeah. I love that now. I'm thinking like chick magnets. Like I want a button that says fate magnet. um,
I'm a fate magnet.
but but
If
no,
we ever get around to selling merch.
I mean, but in and of like in as much as the Death Star is meant to be representative of ultimate power made manifest, like I don't think it's
Mm-hmm.
wrong to see that as a fate magnet, a thing that looms large in the life of anyone that tries to wield that power.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the end of Krennic. It is the end of Tarkin. It is the end of
Mm-hmm.
Palpatine, and like all of those were people who lusted for power's sake, and like it's different than other people that we get to. You may think my characterization of Krennic there is wrong. Correct me if you do, but it's definitely true of Tarkin, and it's definitely true of Palpatine. Like they wanted
Yeah.
power for power's sake, and
Yep.
it's different than an Imperial that we get to see in canon, like Ray Sloan, who was
Yeah.
interested in law and order. Like that's like
Right.
she specifically is not interested in power for power's
Mm-hmm.
sake, but the Death Star represents that,
Yep.
and that's why it had to be destroyed, because it was the power that it wanted to be, and
Yep.
it was too dangerous. Um,
But
Trying to read through
I
chat a little bit.
yeah, I think too there's a theme in kind of, especially in new canon Star Wars, with Palpatine and blending the Force and technology, or starting to lean on technology more than the Force. If you look at him wanting the Death Star in that way, if you read the 2015 Darth Vader comics by
Mm,
Gillen, not to be confused with the Charles Soule Vader comics or any other number of Vader comics, um, Palpatine had acolytes who were not the Inquisitors, but they all had like abilities that were like the Force, but through different means.
right.
Cybernetic augmentations, different nanotechnology, that sort of thing. And Palpatine was kind of looking to see if the Force was actually the biggest and truest power in the galaxy. Hey, welcome, Geeko. Yeah, Coach, whatever. Welcome, Coach. How's it going? I can't speak today. I'm sorry. Um, but I think that's part of it too. Is this kind of very unnatural way of doing things with the Planet Killer? Uh, and then even just to take that to the sequel trilogy, they made a Planet Killer, and the people who were more attached to that, at least one of them hasn't had everything work out for him.
Yep. um, why since we're about halfway through our time, why don't we pivot and talk about some of the characters specifically for a while? Yeah. Do your little robot move. And why don't we start with Jen, since Jen is the through line. What is it about Jen that you find compelling as a character?
Jin is fascinating because she is under so much intense pain. Like, even take anything from Catalyst and Rebel Rising out for a second and go slowly or solely through what's in the movie. She was kind of like, she wouldn't necessarily know it, but she would have some abandonment issues from her, at least her father, if not uh, both of her parents, even though she saw her mom die. Saw abandon her, and we know that from dialogue in the movie. And what we already discussed with kind of growing up with the burden of like, who is my dad? I don't blame her for completely checking out. I don't blame her for the line of, it's not a problem if you don't look up. I'm not saying it's a good thing
Yeah.
that she's that way, um, but she she's got so much going on, and for her to, uh, I don't know, for her to overcome that is something really incredible.
I mean, and I think to go along with what you're saying, I think if you look at her story again, even if you're just looking at the film, like she has every right to just completely check out, given the hand that the galaxy has dealt her. Like she
Mm-hmm.
has like she gets dragged in front of the leaders of the rebellion to answer for something her father did, and
Right.
like she has every right to say, hey, this is not, I'm not him. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
subject to whatever he's got going on. I don't want a part of this. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like she's in jail and like she's content to be in jail. Like pretty
Yep.
much like she doesn't owe the galaxy anything, and she steps up. It's different than with like a character who is more driven by like Luke, as bad as his life was. Luke didn't get abandoned by his parents.
Right.
He wasn't enslaved like his father, but like Jen got left. She got
Yep.
stranded by her parents. She got straight up left by Saul,
Yep.
with a knife and a blaster, and
Yep.
like just gonna peace out and leave you here. And you
Yep.
get you get that story in Rebel Rising where you can see that moment where he just leaves and is
Yep.
like, I'm coming back, and then just never does. And like she just, it would be completely within her rights to just say no thanks. I don't want a part of any of this. And
Yep.
that she is the driving force, like without her there, Cassian kills Galen. Without her there,
Mm-hmm.
they never go to Scarif. Without her on Scarif, they never get the plans because she
Yep.
recognizes Stardust. Like without her
Yep.
there, none of this happens.
Yep.
But like there's such a nobility that none of this happens without her, and
Yep.
she didn't owe anybody anything. And I think
Yep.
that's like the ultimate level of like sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. And it's that sign too of really what makes a person exceptional, because
Right.
she really didn't have to, and no one would have blamed her, and it still wouldn't necessarily been her fault that somebody made a Death Star,
Right.
just because she didn't go and get the plans. But the fact that she kind of did it anyway, and at first she was kind of forced into it, um, after seeing her father's message is when she really stepped up and was like, no, this is important and we have to do this. I think that shows so much about how important family is,
Hmm.
that just literally one voicemail from her dad like completely changes her whole life. Um, I've been talking a lot about this in my Star Wars Resistance reviews, but family is such a big thing in Star Wars, but it's so rare to have any kind of functional family relationship, especially
Right.
when you look at the Skywalkers. And I wouldn't say the Ursos are functional in Rogue One, but to see an expression of love and caring from a parent to a child is so rare in anything we see on screen, anything that makes it to
Right.
theaters in Star Wars. And I think that's something that's really important to show. Um, just how important that type of thing is.
Yeah. And I definitely agree with that too. Um, what about with Cassian? What are your thoughts on? We're still getting a Cassian show at some point, so we'll have more Cassian in our future. What are your Cassian thoughts?
A lot of them are not stream appropriate, if we're being honest. But no,
Read into that whatever you want to, Chet.
read into that whatever you want. No, I'm very excited for the Cassian show for many reasons. I'm pretty sure K2SO is supposed to be back. I think that's just a great. There's so much potential there for a
I think so
show.
too.
I mean, obviously, we know how it ends. It's obviously going to have to be a prequel to a prequel. Um, but I there's just to see a spy show. I mean, just to see Cassian, especially Cassian, because I think you can show his descent into the more cynical side. I think you can see him maybe starting as the better guy that doesn't have his morals compromised, and then
Right.
we kind of see that, and kind of see how he becomes who he is at the beginning of Rogue One. Because the scene at the beginning where he kills his contact is so brilliantly acted. because he kills the guy, but you can just see how much it kills him that he just killed that guy.
Right.
And, but at the same time, he's not remorseful. Like, he's not sad that he did it because he thinks he had to do it, but he's sad that it came to that, if that makes sense. And
Right.
I think that's such an interesting thing to tell, is this story of how easy it is to be so sure of your morals, especially something that is correct. The rebellion against the empire is correct, right?
Right.
They are the good guys. But it's possible to be one of the good guys and do bad things in the name of good.
Right.
And if you can't entertain that possibility, you will become one of the bad guys. It's just unfortunately how it works.
Right.
Um, and I think it can be a very pressing or important show. I don't know how to word it. Also, as long as we're talking about men that you can draw conclusions from me not talking about them, also opportunity for Orson Krennic to make cameo appearances.
Yep. I would like that too. But with Cassian, I think it's so interesting that Cassian's background is as a separatist, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that, the main narrative of most of the people that we think of as heroes of the rebellion are
Mm-hmm.
people that were supporters of the Republic. And then when the
Yep.
Republic became the Empire, we're like, oh no, we have to reclaim this thing that we lost. Like that was, like what was the name of the group of senators? It was like the,
Oh,
um,
delegation of, it was 3,000 or 2,000. I can't remember the number.
but didn't
In
they have an official name? Or I guess I'm thinking maybe of the Alliance to Restore the Republic. Like
oh
that's
yeah
the whole
yeah
idea, is that this is
yeah
the thing we are trying to resurrect,
yeah
and
yep.
Cassian was on the other side of that war, like
Mm-hmm.
because of the circumstances of his life. I think he's been in that fight since he was 6 years old, and that's all he's
Yep.
ever known.
Yep.
Um, and I think it's just such a I don't know. It's a compelling story that he comes to, again, this morally righteous movement to fight against ultimate evil from a
Mm-hmm.
completely different place, and
Yeah.
that he has these methods. I mean, just like Saul, he has methods that are entirely questionable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he kind of learns from that in the end too. Like I think especially after he doesn't kill Galen himself,
Mm-hmm.
I think he kind of learns that. But um,
Well, and what you were just saying, one of my favorite things in new canon is how much they've leaned on a good portion of the rebellion is actually the separatists, because
right,
it makes complete and total sense that the rebellion would come out of the separatists.
right,
But it just never really came up in Legends because it's just the order of operations. You know, we had the original trilogy first, so we had the rebellion first, so they were the good guys first. So why would you make the bad guys the good guys? But I love it, and I love it because really the separatists weren't the bad guys. To go off of what Dale's saying, freedom is the right side. The separatists saw the Republic as no longer being a beacon of freedom in the galaxy, that
yep,
it was corrupt, it was filled with bureaucratic red tape, that no one was following the laws anymore. And they weren't trying to set up an autocracy necessarily. They were trying to do their own democracy. They had a parliament system that we saw in the Clone Wars.
right,
What was wrong about the Separatists was their leadership.
yep,
Dooku was evil. Trade, you know, you had the Trade Federation, the banking clans, you know, Techno Union. You had all of these organizations and corporations running their separacy, whatever the word is,
Confederacy,
Confederacy.
yeah,
Yep, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. Um, and that was the problem, not the, you know, it was exactly the evil is everywhere. It was the you know, everything was corrupt and good people got caught up in it. So I don't think Castian was necessarily a bad guy when he was 6 years old fighting for the
yeah.
separatists.
I don't
You
think so
know.
either. But I just think that he has a. I love that he has a different narrative about that.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yep.
like even like Saw's narrative, comes out of the Clone Wars too, but it's a completely
Yep.
different
Yep.
narrative than that. And I like that we get to see how the rebellion against the Empire has kind of made all of these different people from from different points of view have to work together in order to fight against this thing.
Hmm.
And I think that Cassian is a prime character as an example of that, and I'm glad that we're going to get to see more of Cassian as
Yeah,
well.
I agree.
What about K2? Since we're talking about Cassian, we can't help but talk about K2. Uh,
K2 is great. He's just great. Alan Tudyk is amazing, and oh man, no, I love K2. It's just it really isn't Star Wars until you have like your plucky droid, and he I love his kind of rivalry with Jin.
yeah,
And it really hit me just this last time watching it, just how earned their friendship is.
yeah,
And it's probably one of the best shown earned friendships in Star Wars. Like usually it's like Finn and Poe and you're best friends within 30 seconds or something. But like these two characters have this interplay where she's like calling him target practice and like making him carry bags and the end, when she gives him the blaster is so sweet.
yeah.
And he actually ends with having nice, genuine words to her, and I really like seeing how they come to terms with each other throughout the movie.
Right. I mean, but it's like David said in the chat. Like I love the
Mm-hmm.
snark of it. Like I love sarcastic, biting kind of clever
Yep.
humor. But I like that he has such a fully realized personality that you
Mm-hmm.
immediately understand the first time he comes on screen and says something.
Mm-hmm.
Like some droids, like it takes you a while to get a sense of who they are, but I
Yep.
feel like K2, like you immediately know who he is, and the fact that he and
Yep.
Jen play off one another, I think really shows that as well. Like I love that. Why does she get a blaster? Or like
Mm-hmm. And
I'm
I don't.
I'm coming with you because Cassian says I have
Yes, you
to. um,
do.
um, or like when he slaps Cassian and then apologizes for it. Like
So fresh foot if you mouth off again.
I don't know. I think it's and Alan Tudyk does such a good job of playing K2.
Yep.
And I remember when K2 dies in the film, I think that was the first time that like I
Yep.
really got sad watching it.
Yep.
Um, yeah, congratulations, you're being rescued. Like right from the beginning,
Yep.
like you get that, and like as soon as he says that though, like oh, this is who this character is.
Yep.
And I think I mean, Bodhi, not Bodhi, but Chirrut has a different
Yep.
type of lighthearted nature about him.
Yep.
But I think that this film needed K2. Like I think that
Yep.
this, as a film, as a a piece of art, I don't think this works without K2. Not just like technically that, that they needed him there guarding the door, but I feel like you need the personality that is K2 in this film, as much as you need R2 and 3PO, or BB-8. Like I feel like the
Mm-hmm.
droids very often in Star Wars are the characters that hold things together, and I don't think K2
Yep.
is any exception to that.
No, I
Um,
completely agree. What about Baze and Chirrut as characters?
so I will say that Baze and Chirrut I think are my favorite characters in Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'm alone in saying that. Well, apart I know like you like Krennic, but I know you have an affection for Chirrut as well.
Yep.
Um,
They are very different affections, but this is
yeah,
true.
but I will also say that I really love the Guardians of the Wheels
Yep.
novel.
It's
Was one
really
of
good.
the Disney young adult novels or junior novels, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one that not a lot of people have read. So I recommend. That was one of the very first reviews we did on our channel, wasn't it? Um,
Yeah,
like
it
way back
was
when.
with your old computer.
Yeah, the one that looks really bad.
Yep.
Um, but I love this idea that because basically they're priests,
Yep.
and you got a priest that has given up on his faith, and a priest that is relentless in his faith no matter what. And I like their I think I like them both as discrete characters, but I think they work so much together as a pair,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's like I'm thinking about the fight scene early on when Chirrut
Mm-hmm.
is like the Force protected me, and like Baze was like, no, that was me. Like I had the big gun there. Like I'm the one that saved your butt, not the Force.
Yep. I
Um,
love
but I think that's just such a perfect interplay too to think about what hope is and what the value
Yep.
of faith is in these moments, whether it's religious faith like they have, or just faith in your cause, or
Yeah.
faith in, whatever it is that you believe in. Like the importance of that, I think you really get out of these two characters.
Yep.
And I really love that too. Plus, Chirrut is just awesome and cool,
Uh,
and has
I
that
could
type of
I I
spaghetti
could
western kind of feel to him.
welcome Second Street Marvel, and thank you for subscribing. It's good to see you here. No, I adore Chirrut. I could see Chirrut go like just Chirrut show for like ever. That scene everyone's talking about with is your foot okay? I love it when they like put the bag over his head and he's like, "Are you kidding me? I'm blind."
Right.
Um, which for me, I don't know for anybody out there who's ever watched Avatar: The Last Airbender. There's a character Toph who has a lot of who's blind, who has very similar lines of dialogue that I always think of during that part. But he's great, and I love the back and forth between him and Baze, and I think it's needed that in a movie where every other character is on a journey to find themselves, you need that one character that isn't trying to find himself. I mean, Chirrut does not have a character arc, and that's good. Like he is the rock of the group,
Right.
and is what Donnie Yen. We're all indebted to Donnie Yen because it was his idea to make
Chirrut blind.
to
Right?
make Chirrut blind. Yep, that was not originally in the script, and he added that, and it adds so much to the character. And just in general, having diverse characters in Star Wars in general. But it's I don't know. I like how he's this of everybody in the movie that has, albeit gone through all of these different things. He's the only one that is in some way physically encumbered,
Right.
and yet he's the one that never loses hope. He's the one that is always he's always ready to keep going, but he's also the one that's so sharp. Like when they are on Edu, he's the one that notices that Cassian's probably going to go kill Galen.
Right.
Right? He asks Baze, "Hey, does he have the face of a killer or the face of a friend?" And so to have that hope and that cheerfulness and that humor, but also that kind of grounded realism, he's an amazing character.
Well, and I love the idea of the Guardians of the Whills in general, but I think Chirrut especially embodies this. To believe so strongly in a force that you don't have control over the way that the
Yeah.
Jedi do. Like that's a completely different type of faith. Like
Yep.
like I don't hold it against Yoda when Yoda says, my ally is the force, because he
Right.
can use it, but it's a different type of faith in the force to
Yep.
say I'm one with the force and the force is with me when you're
Yep.
not a Jedi. Like to walk out with a stick to fight off some stormtroopers,
Yep.
and rely on, or to walk out in the middle of a firefight to hit a button. Like
Yep.
that's a different type of faith, and
Yep.
it's not as if it's greater or less than Yoda's faith in the Force, but it's a different type of thing, and I think it's a strong statement, and I think it's what Baze needed. Like it's exactly what Baze needed. Baze, was a character who had completely lost his faith, and he had not lost his like devotion to his friend, but
Right.
he had lost his faith in something larger, and his redemption arc is that he gets that back.
Yep.
And without Chirrut being that rock that you talked about, then that doesn't work either.
I think one of my favorite Chirrut moments is actually as he's dying when Baze starts praying. The relief on Chirrut's face when he hears that is very moving to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's still a couple of characters we didn't necessarily get to. We kind of talked about everybody else in passing, but there was still we have Bodhi and stuff yet. But as we talk about this movie, and this is our journey to the Rise of Skywalker, we included the anthology films in our rewatch. But even though this isn't necessarily about Skywalkers, what do you think a movie like this brings to the table in terms of like the 9 movie story?
I mean, I think it kind of does two things. Honestly, I think it
Mm-hmm.
has an in universe purpose, and I think it has an out of universe purpose. If this makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think in universe, I think it's good to show us, the other part of the story. Like I like that it ends like literally right before A New Hope, because it gives us kind of um, the origin of that hope in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, A New Hope, sometimes, Luke reads is so naive in A New Hope. And
Mm-hmm.
I like that there's something more foundational under that kind of naive belief in good. Um, so I think that's kind of an in universe. I mean, and it tells us, the story of the Death Star plans. Like, I think that's
Right.
important too. But I think from my perspective as a fan, I think
Mm-hmm.
there are so many people who got so jaded by the prequel trilogy. As much as you and
Mm-hmm.
I are apologists for the prequel trilogy,
Yep.
a lot of people still aren't. And I think that Rogue One served a purpose of allowing people to buy back into Star Wars who had been kind of disillusioned with it a little bit, and regain their hope in the series and the
Mm-hmm.
franchise. And I like that too. Um,
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. I think for me, with the series, in light of what we saw with the Last Jedi, if you are inclined to believe what you saw in the movie, which I am, uh, but some are still holding out. But I think Rogue One and Solo both add a lot in saying, like, okay, yeah, there's this Skywalker saga, but there's more in the Skywalker saga than just the Skywalkers,
right,
and that there's all of these other characters that play such pivotal roles, and they have such important stories. And I think that this is really good to tell. It's, as much as I'm a huge Jedi freak, and I love those kind of stories, and I prefer full space stories. I think seeing a story, Nolan and I are always talking about this, just kind of like the regular people,
yeah,
kind of going out and they're able to save the day anyway, even though they don't have all of the superpowers. And I think that's important too. Even if you go to Return of the Jedi, it's the Ewoks that rose up and helped save the day. It wasn't
right,
an army of Jedi that popped through a force portal. It was the people of the galaxy rose up to kind of save themselves. And I think it's important to show that you can have these tales of these heroes, but then there's other stories going on at the same time.
yep. And I think that's one of my favorite things about Rogue One is that it is that it connects to the larger story and the destiny of the characters we know, but it shows
Mm-hmm.
that, you know Leia doesn't get the plans to take to Luke to destroy the thing and redeem Vader if it's not for these other people too.
Right.
And that's not to say the Force could not have willed other things to happen,
Right.
but
Uh, if you believe in what understanding we have of the Force, if all things move to balance, somebody was going to do it from somewhere. Somehow, something was going to happen.
right,
Um, but it ended up being this way with this family, and I don't know. I really like that. I really like the idea of it. From a technical standpoint, I really like the idea. Came from a guy named John Knoll. If you guys aren't familiar with John Knoll, he's actually the visual effects supervisor on the prequel trilogy. He's not a writer, but he had this idea involved with Star Wars for so long. He, you know, had Kathleen Kennedy's email address basically, and was like, "Hey, I have this idea," and that's how Rogue One got started. I just really like that idea,
yeah,
that it was somebody kind of like from within the Star Wars community that's getting to tell these stories. I think that ultimately Disney Plus is going to end up being a better home for stories like this, because then they can tell more specific, more nuanced stories
right,
in a way where they don't have to make it something where everyone can understand it, like a general audience. Which, no shade on general audiences, but it's a lot to expect them to know exactly when a movie takes place, especially if it doesn't always have a crawl.
yeah,
Um, but something on Disney Plus, people are more likely to only either research it before they see it or watch an episode and then figure out what they're watching. Just be less cranky about it. There's just less money involved when you don't have to like pay for the distribution to movie theaters. So I think it's sad that we may not see as many stories like this on the big screen as we could have, because I would have loved to see more of this on the big screen.
Right.
But I do believe Disney Plus is going to ultimately be the better home for it.
I think so too. I think so too. There's so much we haven't talked about with this film. Um,
Yeah.
are there other things you at least want to give a passing mention to? Like I love CGI Tarkin in this. Like I feel like
Oh
that's
yeah.
such a thing
Let's
that
talk
pays
about that for a
homage
second.
to Peter Cushing.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Like I remember when we knew this movie was going to be about the Death Star. I figured that Krennic was invented, and in a large way probably was invented, because we didn't have Peter Cushing, we weren't going to have Tarkin. It was going to be very difficult to recast because it was literally taking place days before we would have seen him as Peter Cushing.
Right.
Uh, and I was like, it's really too bad that they're gonna like do a Death Star movie without Tarkin. And how are you going to tell the Death Star story without Tarkin? And I was really impressed that they kept it so under wraps. I mean, presumably some people knew, but I had no. And just the part where he like Krennic walks in the room and you start by seeing the reflection and then he turns around. I think I welled up. Like I was so shocked that he was there. It was Peter Cushing, and now it's kind of like that Pandora's box, right? Like they recently
Yeah.
announced they want to do a movie with a fully digital James Dean, but that to me is different. It's different to take a movie that is not an adaptation or a remake of something else. We're just going to pull a whole new movie out of a hat and put a dead actor in there, versus this is a movie that's a part of a series and we need a supporting character instead of a lead role, and we're just trying to put somebody back in.
Right.
I think it's apples and oranges, but it was something quite incredible.
I mean, and I think if it was not as well done as it was, then it wouldn't have worked. But
Yes, I agree.
that the people who made that happen did such a good job on it
Hmm.
makes it work in a way that you almost get the sense that if it wasn't going to work, they would have just rewritten the film and not had him in there.
Right,
But that it works, like I don't know, I don't want to say that it works makes it work, but like
right.
that it's so well done sells it.
Yes.
And you really like, even though your brain knows that it's CGI and you can still kind of tell the difference, like you
Hmm.
buy it because it's so well
Yep.
done.
Yep.
And you realize how essential it is that it is so well done and that it's there. And that's and like, as much as you and I joke about this off screen, but like the tension between Tarkin and Krennic is as much fuel for this film as
Oh, it's
anything
so good.
else.
It's
And
so good.
like that doesn't work if you don't get this. Like
Yep.
Krennic could have been our stand-in Tarkin like character, but without that other pressure there, I don't think you get as much from Krennic as a
Right.
character without Tarkin being there as a foil.
I
Um,
completely agree. Um, and then Calamari said, "Have we discussed the corridor scene?" We have not. The infamous Darth Vader scene is so good.
I mean, I
Um,
just every time I watch Rogue One, I'm taken back to like the anxiety that scene induces in me, because
yeah.
like even though we know that they're going to get the plans to the rebels, like we
Yep.
know that's happening when
Yep.
and that's why I like the physicality of the data tapes. I know that's something that you and I talked a lot about right after the film came out, that it's this big hunkin' like actual tape thing.
Yep.
But like the physicality of it in that corridor scene where they're like
Yep.
literally handing it off, like I
Yep.
know I'm not going to survive this because I can't get through this door, but here's this thing, like you have to run and get this to the princess. Like, oh, I don't know, I love it so much. And like when that lightsaber ignites in the darkness, like
Hmm.
I don't know, I still get chills.
Yeah. I got to see that on an IMAX screen, and it was like worth the price of admission just to see that scene on IMAX. And I think it's great to see, because, you know, it's one of those things that's a big part of fandom discourse now, because everything in fandom discourse has to suck the fun out of everything.
Right.
But you know, it's like the fan bros, like the Darth Vader do that. You know what? I am not a bro, but I adore that part, because yes, I like seeing Vader like pull a guy and throw him into the ceiling. You know, you want to talk about stuff in movies that work or don't. You know, it takes a certain amount of suspension of disbelief to watch the original trilogy, and like Vader is scary until you watch him fight in the original trilogy. And maybe it's sacrilege for me to say it.
Yeah.
You know, it's difficult to move around in that suit, and they could only do so much, and they do a great job for what they could do. But like that scene, to see on screen why Vader is really so terrifying, more than just the breathing. Also, hello, Gina, welcome. But I love that part, and you and I were talking before. I love the part where Krennic goes to see him at his castle.
Yeah.
And he's probably one of the few people. I can't imagine everybody just gets invited to Vader's castle, but maybe it's like Weekend at Bernie's. I don't know. But there's a reference that very few people will get, but that's fine. But I love how
it shows how
Vader. Yeah, even that movie came out. Anyway, I'm too young for that movie. But I love the careful not to choke on your aspirations director. Yep. And he's choked Krennic and goes away. And then Krennic's response is to smile and like he's like so happy, which is so weird because you just got like force choked. But to me, you know, it must have Krennic wild. Like, why is Vader so special? He's a guy in a suit who can't breathe on his own. Like, you know, and you would be the one that would get the reference. You know, to me, that was Krennic figuring out, oh, I know Vader's secret. Because no one probably knows Vader's secret. Because then you get to that hallway scene, and it's because anybody who's seen Vader, for as powerful as he is right?
Yep.
There are people who don't know why Vader is important, and dead people, basically, and like Tarkin, and that's about it. Those are like the three categories. And I think that's why that scene is important, even if it is cool, fan bro, awesome, whatever. I think it has value.
I mean, I definitely agree. And I mean, honestly, the entire inclusion of Vader in this film, I guess you could almost write off as fan service, but it's fan service that works. Like, it just does.
Yep.
And I like to, and I mentioned this earlier, but I like that this film presses up all the way up to the beginning of A New Hope. Like, where A New Hope comes in, where with the Star Destroyer chasing the rebels. Like, I like that it goes literally up to that point, because it gives that much more context to something that we know and love, and it really works for me.
Yep, I completely agree.
What else comes to mind? I feel like there's always so much more to talk about than I remember in the moment.
Well, you know, two characters we talked about and didn't really get to were Bodhi and Saw. I can't remember who it was, but somebody in chat said that Saw was really cool because he came out of Clone Wars, and I think that is so exciting that they had this character and that they actively made a choice to say, hey, we could make this connect to Clone Wars and it would work like this. And I really liked that. It maybe, you know, I don't know which came first, chicken or the egg. I don't know if it was they were already planning on bringing Saw back for Rebels, and then decided like, hey, we're bringing him back in Rebels. We could put him in Rogue One, or we could make this character that's in Rogue One Saw, or if they put him in Rebels because they knew they're going to put him in Rogue One. But it was really cool to see a character follow through two shows and the movie like that. And you know, like you said before, he is a terrorist. He just happens to be a terrorist that's fighting tyranny. Right. And I think that's such an interesting line. Why is he a terrorist where not the entire Rebel Alliance is? Or are they? And is there such a thing as, you know, some probably some dangerous lines of thoughts to bring up on stream, but like you can tell, Mon Mothma and her people are good people, and they're trying to do things the right way, even if they always succeed.
Right.
And where does that line come in? I don't know. It's so interesting to think about.
Well, and I think part of the difference between Saw's partisans and the rest of the Rebel Alliance, even though they're
Mm-hmm.
both fighting for good, I
Yeah.
think the Rebel Alliance wants to fight on behalf of people who don't know that they're fighting for good and
Yep.
convince them that they are fighting for good.
Yep.
And Saw wants to do it in spite of all that. Like, Saw
Yep.
wants to do what he thinks is right, regardless of whether or not anybody else agrees, and regardless of whether or not, he's protecting innocent lives in the meantime. And like, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the difference, and that they are both right is almost coincidental in that moment. Um,
Right.
but no, I think Saw's a really compelling character. I think there's something poetic to the fact that Saw resigns himself to not get a redemption arc, in a
Yep.
way. He realizes that as much as the Death Star is wrong, he's kind of a part of it. Like, he's a part
Mm-hmm.
of that type of power struggle, and like, he could have just as easily gone with them and gotten on that ship. Like, there's
Yep.
no real benefit of him staying on Jeddah, but he resigns himself to it, and I think there's a poetry in that too.
Yeah. I think his kind of parting words with Jin. I think he realizes that Jin is going to be the kind of true hope, and that he's kind of the time gone by. With him too, it's kind of I don't know if this has been addressed in some other things because I haven't read everything that tied into Rogue One, but it's always been my headcanon that the Borgullet that he uses on both like was used on him, and that's part of why he's so spacey in that
Yeah,
movie. Because like the way he says, like to Bodhi, he's like, one tends to lose one's mind. Like it almost feels like he's speaking from experience.
right. Yeah,
It always felt to me like he was caught by the Empire and it was used on him, and then he escaped with the Beast and is using it on Imperials, like back as revenge.
yeah. No, I've always thought that too.
Mm-hmm.
So, what
It's
about Bodhi though? I know that's the other character we talked about less.
Yeah, Bodhi, he's got a very, what's the word, relatable's not the word, but he's got a redemption arc that I feel like most normal people could accept or could like see themselves in,
Right.
right? Because like we talk about redemption arcs and it's like Darth Vader who took over the galaxy, Galen who helped build the Death Star, even Cassian who was fighting for the good guys but was doing clearly obviously bad things. Bodhi was like a supplies pilot. Like he wasn't even a TIE pilot. He wasn't in combat. He was
Right.
taking food or supplies or paperwork or something back and forth.
Data
And it would
tapes.
be so data tapes, so many tapes, just every tape ever. And it would be so easy for him to just do his job every day and think anything wrong of it whatsoever,
Right.
not see any of the evils that were going on. And I think that is a far more relatable form of being caught up in evil and a lot more terrifying form of being caught up in evil that you could be doing, you could be helping not even having made the choice to, like
Yeah.
you're just oblivious. I think that's scarier to me than the idea that I just snap someday or something. Um, and so his story is some ways more compelling. In some ways, I feel bad for the guy because he's like Galen said, if I followed my heart, I could find a way to make up for the things I've done. And I just want to sit him down and be like, Bodhi, honey, you haven't done anything. Like it's okay.
Right.
Like you're not gonna get coal in your stocking. It's gonna be fine. Like it's nice that you want to help, but like take a deep breath. And so I don't know. It's like his story to me is both more compelling, but also less. I don't know quite how to articulate it, but just because of how normal it is.
No, I like that too, and I like that in a film about normal people, he's just a normal Imperial too, like not even a
Mm-hmm.
stormtrooper like Finn, but just a guy who's just doing a job. I think there's something nice about that too. Um, One other thing, and I know we're kind of over our usual time, but one other thing I wanted to mention um, was how much I like that the film doesn't overplay the romance between Jen and Cassian.
Yeah.
That it's a part of the film, but it's
Yep.
not overstated. Like, and it would have been very easy to like have them like super make out while they're dying, and they don't do that. Like it leans away
Yeah.
from that, and I think there's value in the fact that it
And
leans
it's
just enough into that to
right.
get it, and then not.
It's funny you say that because I completely agree. Like they don't play into it at all. In fact, there's very little, if anything, like explicitly romantic. Like what Calamari is saying is even romance, but at the same time, there is no story in Star Wars where I just feel the steam like those two.
Yep.
Um, like I don't. It's hard for me to watch them because it's like man, like the part where they Cassian has just agreed to go with Jin to Scarif.
Yep.
You are both wrong. I'm just gonna say that in the chat. You're both very wrong, but it's fine. But like they're like, she's like, I'm not used to people sticking around. He's like, and they're like circling each other and like looking each other and like this be a little bit more explicit than I usually am on stream, but they basically have eye sex in that elevator. I'm sorry. Like
Yep.
I don't know what movie you're watching, but the way they're looking at each other, no. No, it is not. It is not calamari. It is not. Do not know a movie. So, there was no. It's 100. They are a thing. No, it's true. It's true. Actually, Stuart's been laying down some production details in the chat. I'm pretty sure there's an alternate version of the movie where they thought they needed a happier ending, and it ended with Jin and Cassian as a couple. But when they went with the everybody dies ending, they just never had them get together as a couple.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case too. But I definitely read it the way you do. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's what makes it work so well for me, is that it's something that that is like unquestionably there for me, but but it doesn't have to be overt. Um, but I don't know. I think it's definitely romantic. Like I think there's more. Like there's stuff there.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, that's fine. Obviously, we don't have to agree. Like films are open to interpretation, but like I think there's like more steam going on between them and between like Han and Leia. Like, but maybe I just see different sides. No, there were two scenes. They had two ends. They had a dark ending and a happier ending because they didn't think that they were going to let them get away with a kill everyone ending. Not on streams then.
Well, while you're talking about the ending, what do you think about the fact that is the ending that we get, that all of our cast of characters sacrifice themselves?
It's funny because if you had asked me before if I was sitting in the seat, trailers haven't started yet, lights are still up, and you go, Jess, what do you think's going to happen? I would have said pretty much everyone's going to die. They might keep one or two characters around so they can like write some books or have a action figure line or something.
Right.
Like they probably won't, like just for the sake of merchandising, they won't kill everyone, but like people aren't going to make it out of this movie. But there's this weird thing that happens where when a Star Wars movie starts, I forget every logical thing I know about the entire world, and I'm just watching a Star Wars movie. And so I forgot that everyone is probably going to die during this movie. And it gets to the point people are kind of like K2 had died. They're starting it off, and then the Death Star shows up. And as soon as the Death Star showed up, I'd literally at that point forgotten the Death Star was in the movie. I was just so like caught up in what was going on. That's how bad it gets for me. I am anyway. I literally audibly in the theater said, "Oh crap," when I saw the Death Star, and that's when it hit me that everyone's going to die and no one's gonna make it out, and I just like sank in my chair. Like No, I don't think everyone will die in Tross. I think we're gonna get a. I think we'll get a. I think people will die. I think some will, but I don't think it's gonna be an everyone dies. They will end the Skywalker saga with
Uh,
some kind of victory.
I think so too. But I went into Rogue One anticipating that everyone would die, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't feel like I don't feel like vindicated that they all did. But I
Yeah.
think one of the things I love about the ending of this film is that even though they all die, they all get a scene, and
Yep.
every one of their deaths is meaningful.
Yep.
Like in that kind of desperation, like anxious, like this has to work in order for everything else to work kind of moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like they each play a part, and if they don't each play their part before they get their end, then it doesn't work.
Yep.
If Bodhi can't get the receiver hooked up, it doesn't work. If Chirrut can't hit the button, it doesn't work. If Baze
Yep.
doesn't hold out for Chirrut, then it doesn't work. If Jen and Cassian can't get to the top of the tower, then it doesn't work. If K2 can't hold the door, then it doesn't work. So even though they all die, like
Yep.
none of their sacrifices are needless, and all of
Right.
their sacrifices are chosen. Like they,
Yep.
they all get a moment where they're like, no, this is what I'm choosing to do for
Yep.
for everything else. And I don't know. I think it's different than just a death that gets cast aside. Like all of their deaths were meaningful, and all of their deaths said something about who they are as characters, and I really like that.
Right. No, I completely agree. I think it was really well done. Um, but yeah, I think at this point, if we keep talking, we'll just go a whole other hour,
Yep.
which I don't know.
So before we wrap things up, what we're gonna do this week, I think our plan is
Mm-hmm.
to for since we missed doing a film stream last week because I was
Yep.
sick mostly. Um, I think what we're going to do is we've done our Rogue One stream today, and then we're going to
Mm-hmm.
go right into a New Hope stream on Thursday. That is our
Yep.
plan, and then we will have more Mandalorian content on Friday when the new
Yep.
episode of that comes out, and then we're doing our Bloodline stuff on Wednesdays
Yep.
right now. So that's kind of our plan for the rest of the week. If you've seen The Mandalorian, we have reviews up for that for the first episode. We have a spoiler-free review that you can check out even if you haven't watched it, and a
Mm-hmm.
spoiler review. Encourage you to go check those things out, and you can find us on all of the places. The links are on the screen or in the link. You know where they are.
Yep.
You know where to find us.
Thank
Um,
you guys so much for being here.
yeah, these are always fun. You guys showing up for
I
these
love
film
these
streams
streams.
make it a really fun time.
Oh
So
yeah,
we're
it's way more fun to interact with you guys than just. I mean, we would be having this. We often have this conversation anyway, but it's so fun to go back and forth with you. Are we doing? Can we do a Catalyst one? I mean, we can probably reread Catalyst at some point and do a stream for that, but we're not going to read it before the Rise of Skywalker.
yeah, but
But
but like this is almost us at the halfway point of our journey to the Rise of Skywalker. So
yeah,
thanks for
yeah,
hanging out with us.
yep.
Um,
We're on to the original and then the sequel trilogy after this. Holy,
Down to the wire. It'll be here before you know it. But
oh man.
but thanks guys, and we'll see you on Thursday.
Thursday. Thank you.
Bye
Bye.
guys.